Hello, I'm Bruce Lorentz, and this show is called Bruce on the Loose. I talk to a lot of people in city government, various businesses in the community, and also the school system as well. Carl Cotraro is with us, and Carl, you've been here. This is our fourth show, and I really am excited. My boyhood hero, Rocky Colavito, we're going to talk about today. He was quite a ball player, wasn't he?
He sure was, and I guess I'll say it right now. As we do this show, today is his 90th birthday.
Rocky, 90 today.
90 today, as we do this show.
And
yes.
He, I think, was born in the Pennsylvania area, possibly?
No,
oh, no, New York City.
He was the Bronx, yes.
Yeah,
yes. Bronx boy, yes.
And he lived in Pennsylvania for a time. Is that where he resides now?
He resides in Burnville, Pennsylvania, near Reading, and that's where he met his wife, his current wife, of course, back when they were married in 1954, and so they've lived there since 1954. That's been their home.
Who signed Rocky Colavito to an Indians contract?
Well, Rocky was he'd grown up in the Bronx, and so he was always always wanted to play with the Yankees. You know, his boyhood hero was Joe DiMaggio, so he always had dreams of being a Yankee. Always wanted to be a Yankee, but when it came time to get signed by professionals, he was courted by quite a few teams, Yankees being one of them, and the Yankees, as according to Rocky, they were arrogant toward him, and so the Indians had showed interest in him. So Hank Greenberg, who was the general manager of the Indians, had signed him when he was 17 years old.
Wow, that's really good for the Indians to go ahead and be observant and making sure that they inked him to a contract. When did Rocky Colavito first appear in Cleveland?
His first, another thing about Rocky was that he did a lot of things really well, but one thing he didn't do very well, he was not a very fast runner. He had flat feet. So ironically enough, his first appearance in Cleveland in a Cleveland game was as a pinch runner in 1955. That was his first appearance, which is strange enough.
That is ironic because everyone, was really played right field, I believe, and boy, he had a rocket of an arm, and
yes,
people did not take liberties with him and try to advance extra bases, did they?
No, there were stories about how he would throw that ball on a line, sometimes over the third baseman's head, into the stands, still on a line.
Yeah.
Right into the stands. So he had one heck of an arm. That's why originally he was considered to be a pitcher, and the Indians were considering converting him to a pitcher instead of not having him be an outfielder, but he said he wanted to be an outfielder, and so that's why Hank Greenberg intervened and said, no, he wants to be an outfielder, we'll make him an outfielder.
When did he hit his first home run in Cleveland?
His first home run in Cleveland was in 1956. It was his first hit of the 1956 season as well, and so he hit that off a Kansas City Athletics pitcher, Bobby Shantz, and that was the beginning of it. So he went back to the minors in '56, which he wasn't too happy about, but he came back and had a very decent 1956 season too.
We talk about over the history of the Cleveland Indians popular players. Joe Charbonneau, for his brief career, was very popular.
He looked like he might be
I don't
second.
think anyone compared to Rocky Colavito, and I'm certainly in that camp as well. My mother tells the story. I cried 3 days after Rocky was sent to the Detroit Tigers. So why was he so popular? Well,
he was a fan favorite for a lot of reasons. One is that he would wait and sign any autograph. He'd stay there as long as people were there. He would just keep signing autographs. He wouldn't say, that's enough, I have to go. He would stay there as long as he could to sign autographs. So he was very fan friendly then. There would be stories about how, sometimes if, let's say, the boys got a little unruly, they would. This is a great picture of the girls looking up at him. But he would tell the kids, okay, you guys stand in line, make a line, stand in line, and he would expect them to say thank you afterwards. He would make them be polite. He wouldn't, they couldn't just run off someplace. He expected them to be courteous and respectful. So he was that. He would visit kids in the hospitals. He would do things like this, and so also just a very humble personality as he would appear. So again, there's a picture of him visiting the kids in the hospital. So fans just really loved him. Prior to this, the Indians had good records in the 1950s, but they didn't have any stars, didn't have any real outgoing people as stars. And so here comes Rocky Colavito, home run hitter, great smile, great personality. He looked like a Hollywood star, and so that's why Cleveland just loved him. Still loves him today.
And he really, the fans embraced him, and he embraced the community, and he really did fit in, didn't he? He really was a person, and that was interesting. You talked about manners were important, that he wanted people. Those are the 1950s, where now it's gone a little bit sideways.
Yeah, he was raised with that. He just he treated people with dignity and class, and he expected to be treated with the same way. And that's what a lot of times. Well, in some cases, some managers didn't treat him that well, and he expected that, and that was part of his personality that people liked about him.
What was Rocky Colavito's best year at the plate in the 1950s?
His best year in the 50s was the 1958 season. He had 41 home runs, which was great, but he also had a batting average of 303. So he had hit for power and average in 58, and so that was his really breakout year, was 58, and he looked great. 1959, he had another great year, but the batting average was a little bit less. But he had 42 home runs in 59, so that's 83 home runs in 2 years. That's a lot of home runs.
Where a lot of teams really didn't feature the home run hitter. He was really one of the best in the top 5 for years and years in the American League.
You take a look at some of his stats and look at all the home runs just year after year after year. Think, wow, this guy just keeps producing. He just keeps working on it, and that's another reason why he was so popular. Was that fans loved the home run ball, and so that is added to the fact that he was so popular because people would come out and see him hit a home run. Most of the time he'd get a home run, so that did what the fans wanted to see.
You mentioned 1959, and I think I still recall listening on the radio, June 10th, 1959, Cleveland is in Memorial Stadium, Baltimore, Maryland. What did Rocky do?
Well, prior to that, Rocky was in a bit of a slump, and so he wasn't hitting very well, and so he goes to Baltimore's Memorial Stadium, which was a notoriously bad place to hit home runs. Prior to this, only one person had hit 2 home runs in one game, and so Rocky, for his first at bat, gets a walk, and then he promptly cracks off 4 consecutive home runs.
Hold it, you mean this is in one game?
One game, takes a walk, next 4 at bats, home run, and the last home run was the farthest of all 4 of them. So he was absolutely on fire on that game. So up to that point, he was only the second batter to ever hit 4 consecutive home runs in one game. So that's how memorable it was.
I had to look it up on Google how many total players in MLB history hit for. Only 18 throughout the whole history of Major League Baseball hit 4 home runs in one game.
And that's up as of today.
Yes,
back to 1959,
right?
It would have probably just a handful.
Right, very much so. Very much so. Then we get through the 1959 season. Cleveland has a pretty fair team. I think the White Sox won the pennant that year, didn't they?
They beat the Indians out by 5 games in '59. But the Indians were in the pennant run. They had a lot of good players on that team. Tito Francona, Terry Francona's father, was on the '59 Indians at that time. He also provided some good pop too. And Billy Martin was on that team.
Right.
Well, people don't remember him being an Indian, but he was on that team. But they were doing real well. They had a good, strong team. Things looked really good, continuing on after the 1959 season.
And just before the season started, the 1960 season, what happened?
Another atomic bomb fell on Cleveland. When Frank Lane finally got his wish, Frank Lane had always wanted to trade Rocky Colavito. He said he was not a complete player. He said he was selfish because also Frank Lane loved high batting average players. People love to see home runs. They don't love to see singles. And so they trade 2 days before the season began, on April 17th, 1960. Frank Lane completes the trade to have Rocky Colavito traded for Detroit's Harvey Keene, who was the 1959 batting league leader. He batted .353, which sounds great, but he also, out of all of his hits in 1959, 3/4 were singles. So he trades a singles hitter for a home run hitter.
And also, he didn't have the arm Rocky did. Rocky, again, we talked about his not being fleet, but he positioned himself well. He was a very good outfielder. He made good catches, and again, his arm, a lot of runners didn't take a liberty and didn't go the extra base with him at all. So you had, in my estimation, quite a complete player in Rocky Colavito, and we get a singles hitter.
And then, yeah, in 1959, he peaked. That was as good as he was ever going to get. He was injury plagued throughout his career. Meanwhile, 26-year-old Rocky Colavito, he was just approaching his peak. And so you trade again. It was just Frank Lane did not want Rocky Colavito on the team. He just did not like him. He didn't fit his image of the tobacco chewing ball player that Harvey Keene was. And so he wanted somebody who fit that image better, and that was Harvey Keene, not Rocky Colavito.
A lot of experts say that the years from 28 to 32 are traditionally the peak years, as you indicated, of batters, of professional baseball players, because they kind of learned. They learned from other players. They've learned from managers, and by playing, Rocky certainly was an example to his teammates, and he was a very good teammate.
Everybody always thought he was a great teammate. He was the captain of the Indians on 2 different occasions because the team loved him so much, and so he was respected because he conducted himself very well. He stuck up for his teammates. He was the kind of a guy you'd want on your team in so many ways.
Well, okay, Harvey Keene won the batting title in '59. Did he win it then when Frank Lane traded for him in '60, 61?
Oh no, he batted .303. That was it.
Yeah,
he has a 300 hitter.
Right.
The same thing. 3/4 of his hits were singles. He had 9 home runs.
Oh my.
So he was mostly a doubles and singles hitter is what he was, and he did the same thing until he got injured at the end of the season in 1960, and he didn't finish the season because he was injured again. Again, the same thing had gone his whole career, cropped up again, and he was injured again.
So he was injury prone. And Rocky, did he continue to hammer the ball out of the ballpark?
He did very well with the Detroit Tigers in his 4 years there, 139 home runs total. He had his best year ever in 1961 with the Tigers with his 45 home runs, and so in a 270-something batting average. So he was entering his peak just as he gets traded to the Tigers. So he had his best years in Detroit. If he had those years in Cleveland, I would think you'd see a statue of Rocky Colavito there at Progressive Field today.
Why did Rocky, he didn't seem to be quite as happy in Detroit. They had several other players that had been established there for years, and he kind of took second fiddle, didn't he?
He definitely took second fiddle to Al Kaline, who was he was the man with the Detroit Tigers for all those years, and so Rocky was coming in as a supporting player. Him and Norm Cash, a prior Cleveland Indians prospect who got traded by Frank Lane. So all these Indians up in Detroit producing for the Detroit Tigers, but Al Kaline was the most popular player, and then anything Rocky did would be secondary to what Al Kaline did.
You were telling me before the show started that there was a particular writer that really, with a microscope, looked at Rocky's strikeout record and said he wasn't the player that everyone thought he was.
I don't know his name offhand, but he used to keep track of what he called runs not batted in, just to deliberately needle Rocky all the time, and so. Rocky was a home run hitter, so he was swinging for the fence, so sometimes he would strike out. It's just the way it goes. And so this guy just took exception, probably because he was a big Al Kaline fan, and so always tried to make Rocky look bad compared to Al Kaline.
So Frank Lane was general manager of Cleveland. We jettisoned him out of Cleveland, and we got a new general manager, and we got Rocky Colavito back in Cleveland.
And Gabe Paul succeeded Frank Lane, and one of the things he wanted to do is he was trying to get Rocky Colavito back. Now, Rocky did go from the Detroit Tigers, had a sense that maybe it was time to move on, so he went to the Athletics for a while, but then finally in 1965 they made the deal. It was a 3-way deal, and Rocky Colavito got to return to Cleveland. That would be in January of 1965. So he came to Cleveland in many ways probably saved the baseball in Cleveland, because the attendance had dropped from about 1.5 million in 1959 to about 500,000 in 1964, and so it was time to consider moving the team. until the interest came back when Rocky came back, and then the attendance spiked right back up again.
They were very serious about moving. They were looking at some sites in Florida, and also maybe even Montreal and Toronto, Canada. Back then there was no Canadian teams, but they were looking at various spots, and they were very serious about moving because they never were able to compete with the Browns.
Gabe Paul did not want to give up the prospects, one of which was Tommy John, who later had a phenomenally good major league pitching career. He gave up Tommy Agee. They gave up the catcher Johnny Romano. So it was they gave up 3 players in order to make this deal happen. But Gabe Paul gets sometimes criticized for being a terrible trade. I don't agree. I think it was a trade that needed to get made in order to keep baseball alive in Cleveland.
So Rocky came back to Cleveland in '65, and the attendance then automatically went up.
About 300,000 increase almost instantly as a result of him coming back. He had a great year. He had plenty of home runs. He played in every game. He had no errors in the outfield. A great defender in the outfield too. So, in his first at bat as a Cleveland Indian at home, what does he do? Gets a home run, 4th inning. So it's he delivers again. It's amazing how he does that.
So really, even in the 1950s, when Cleveland we talked about their very good teams, they really didn't have one person that stood out far and above the rest of the players, like Rocky Colavito.
Nothing like that. They had it was some well-rounded teams, some very even teams, but they didn't have they definitely didn't have the big home run hitting bats. They didn't have the big personalities. They was good teams, but not outstanding in terms of players, and that's where Rocky comes into play. That he's now suddenly this Hollywood type star who appears on the scene.
So Rocky is in his early 30s when he comes back in '65, and he had a good first year. How long then did he stay, and what was his production like after '65?
He had in '66 he had even more home runs, but his batting average slipped. And then in '67, that's when things started to unravel because a new manager came in, Joe Adcock. Joe Adcock was a former power hitter, and so in some ways, he and Rocky were rivals during their hitting days. And so Rocky kind of looked at him, and as in, "Who are you to tell me what to do?" Because I'm a hitter, and you're the manager. And so they didn't get along well. Joe Adcock stopped playing him in right field. He had him platoon in left field, which is not his natural position, or pinch hit. So they just did not get along.
Oh, by the way, I forgot to ask, when Al Kaline, I think he was a right fielder. Did Rocky play right, or did they move him to left field?
I believe he was in left field.
Okay, yeah, I think he might have been, because I think Al Kaline was a Hall of Famer, and I think he came up and had a great year in the mid-50s and continued to play right field. Yeah, Joe Adcock was with the Milwaukee Braves, and he was with Hank Aaron, and also they had Eddie Matthews. So he was kind of a home run hitter, but he wasn't the top dog there. He was kind of one of the 3rd or 4th rated home run hitters there.
And he played for the Indians in 1963 as well. He did have 1 year with the Indians, but so maybe there was, it could have very well been some jealousy going on back and forth about this and some of those things. Yeah, it's the way baseball is, some little thing can just get thrown off, and all of a sudden Rocky's not happy because of this. But you can imagine, he went from playing every day to playing every so often as a pinch hitter or a left fielder, and his production went down dramatically.
We talked about Rocky getting along with his teammates and most of the managers, Joe Adcock in reverse, but he really had a special bond with Herb Score. And Herb was a long-time announcer for the Cleveland Indians, and I knew a little bit about his career, but he was a phenomenal left-hand pitcher, and unfortunately was hit by a line drive, and his career never was the same.
Never was the same. He was traded to the Chicago White Sox by Frank Lane a few days. I think it was a few days before Rocky was in 1960. So Frank Lane had his way with him too. But they were Rocky and Herb Score were roommates coming up together, and so they got to know each other very well, and they stayed close for all of Herb's life.
After Rocky played in Cleveland, did he have other stops along the way?
Well, after Cleveland, and he was traded to the Chicago White Sox for 2 nobodies, really. The Indians just wanted to get rid of him, unfortunately. And so he finished up the 1967 season with the White Sox. The they couldn't come to an agreement as far as a contract with the White Sox in '68. So it turns out that the Dodgers picked him up in 1968. He did nothing with the Dodgers. Had a very poor half season with the Dodgers. Dodgers released him, and so as he's wrapping up his playing career, one team calls, the New York Yankees. And I thought, what a fitting way for him to finish his career, to finish with the Yankees, the team he wanted to play with his whole playing career. And so he got to play for them. He also got to pitch for them, which was something else. I remember I was saying he had a great pitching arm. Mm-hmm. He pitched for Cleveland once in 1958, but he also pitched for the Yankees in 1968. Both times he pitched against the Detroit Tigers, and both times he pitched against Al Kaline. Little side note on both things.
Yeah, very, very much so. That's a very ironic situation. Mm-hmm. Al Kaline, again, the Hall of Famer and tremendous player. Then after his playing career, what did Rocky Colavito do?
Right after playing, there was some talk, at least in the one book, he was considering coming back to the Indians in '69, but Alvin Dark talked him out of it and said not to do so. So he stayed out of baseball for a while. He went back to his home in the Reading, Pennsylvania area, worked for his father-in-law, and then he went back to the Indians. He was a TV announcer in 1972. He was there with Harry Jones on TV, and so he had to do that for a while. And he was also did some triple duty because he was also a third base coach, or a first base coach, I should say. He was also a hitting instructor. He also did TV color commentary. So he was doing a lot of things all over the place. And then finally the team said, forget the TV stuff. Let's just have you be a first base coach and hitting instructor. So he did that throughout the mid-'70s until 1978. So he was with the team actively until '78. So
really, the majority of his career was with Cleveland, and mm-hmm. he again was a special person, and the crowd just really gravitated to him. He was something else to the mm-hmm. to the fans.
And even today, that whenever he makes an appearance, people come out to see him, and and so forth. So he's still very, very much loved in the Cleveland area, even now he's age 90.
90 today. And how is he doing today? Do we have any current health reports on Rocky?
I don't know if he's, right. The most current thing I know is that he did come back to the area in 2021. He did have a statue of him dedicated at Tony Brush Park there in Little Italy section on Mayfield Road, and so there was a big turnout for that. He came out for that and was, once again honored again for his accomplishments. So he was there and made some, had some speeches and so forth. And other than that, I can't say I know for sure how he is today, but I did call him and talk to him, and he sounded good. This was a couple of years back, and so he sounded strong. So hopefully he's still strong today.
The 1950s, I've read several books, and it said it was the golden age of baseball with mm-hmm. Willie Mays, Rocky Colavito, and Mickey Mantle, and all the Bronx Bombers, and all the various teams. Do you agree? I think the Cubs had a fine shortstop, Ernie Banks.
Well, for one thing, it was definitely the golden age of Cleveland baseball because they had their highest winning percentage during the 1950s. Mm-hmm. They had 9 winning seasons. The one losing season they had was only one game under 500. They had 1 first place finish. They had 6 second place finishes. And so if it weren't for the Yankees always seeming to be in the way, they would have had a lot more winning in terms of pennants and so forth. But for the Indians, the 1950s were definitely their golden era.
I don't think there was as many other sports. We didn't hear very much about lacrosse. Soccer was just starting. And I think baseball was really America's pastime, and people, really enjoyed baseball, and they came to the parks. But you said the fan base kind of fluctuated. When mm-hmm. Cleveland had good teams, Pete Frank would say, we're really just scratching the surface on what mm-hmm. we can do.
Yeah, Cleveland was always the sleeping giant, they used to call it, where
right.
they would get these massive turnouts in the old stadium. You would get these 70,000 people would show up for a game, and it'd just be an amazing sight to see that. So Cleveland will always support a good winning team. It will definitely support good winning baseball if it's presented, and it was for all those years, and the Cleveland fans did come out.
A lot of people, certainly remember Rocky Colavito for his feats, but I will always remember 4 home runs in one game. You know, it was just a phenomenal game he had. And again, as you indicated, not an easy stadium.
Oh, no.
Memorial Stadium was not easy to hit. And other people might have had 4 home runs, but he had 4 consecutive home runs.
4 consecutive home runs in a very difficult park. And again, the other backstory was that he was in a hitting slump prior to that. And so he snapped out of it very quickly.
Well, Carl, I really learned a lot about Rocky Colavito. Any last words you might say about him? Happy birthday, we might say to Rocky, and we hope you have several more, and really what you did to Cleveland was very memorable, and we appreciate all that you've done in Cleveland.
I just remember as a youth in the mid-'60s that we all talked about Rocky Colavito. We all imitated the behind-the-back stretch, and we all imitated the pointing at the pitcher with the bat.
Yeah, that's
and all
right.
those
He pointed the bat directly at the pitcher for a little while, and then brought it back, didn't he? I remember that.
And so we all did that. So that's how I don't have to admit, I don't remember him in his first stay with the Indians, but I definitely remember him in the second stay.
Well, Carl, I appreciate this is a 4th show you've done with me, and I've learned a lot each and every time. And I guess you're going over to Suprema coming up in the fall and doing a show on the Cleveland Browns. Is that right?
I've often wanted to do a program on the 1960s or on the Browns, but I thought, I don't know what I want to do here. But I thought, I know, I'll do the 1964 Browns because, again, that's something I remember when they had an upset win over the Baltimore Colts in the 1964 season to win the NFL championship. Last time, as we know, that they won the NFL championship. But there's a great story behind it, too, and that's what I'll be telling.
And then the Hall of Fame honored Jim Brown, who passed away recently, and certainly his 9 years were very, very successful in Cleveland.
I was able to present that program one time before he passed away, which I thought that's 2 days before he passed away. I presented that for the first time, so that was fitting. That was great.
Thanks for viewing Bruce on the Loose, and we'll have some additional shows coming up for your enjoyment. Thanks for viewing.
You are watching WCTV, Wadsworth Community Television.